Hello, everybody. I'm Ryan from Fireside Yankees, and we are joined by a very special guest, a man who, you could argue needs no introduction, SNY's Andy Martino, who has just published his book, The Yankee Way, a very detailed look at the behind the scenes of the organization, and a lot of really interesting storylines about the Yankees over really the last few decades, and some things that I think a lot of fans don't really get to know about the organization, or don't get to know about the people inside the organization. A lot of things about Brian Cashman that I think a lot of fans should get to know, and hopefully we'll get to kind of talk about a lot of those storylines and a lot of really important details that again just people often overlook, and these gaps in industry and public perception. And Andy Martino kind of uncovers it all. So Andy, how you doing today, my friend? And yeah, it's great to have you on.
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thanks for that nice introduction. And yeah, the book came out yesterday, and I'm glad it's out in the world because it's a lot. It's a lot of stories that haven't been told about this famous franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of getting right into it, when you were writing The Yankee Way, what were some of the most eye-opening differences between like fan perception and then the actual truth, or perhaps industry perception?
Great question. A number of differences. I mean, if you're talking about the difference between fan perception and industry perception, I suppose you have to start with the perception of Brian Cashman himself, and that you go from understandably what Yankee fans are used to, being in the World Series more regularly than they've been lately. And last year was a tough year, so there was a lot of fire Cashman going around, even in the stands and certainly on social media. And the people who work for him uh, found that absurd because there's a lot of loyalty and affection for him inside that organization, above him and below him. And people, his competitors, his rivals, Billy Beane, because of Moneyball, is probably the most famous GM I guess, of all time. You might say Branch Rickey or something like that. But he said Brian Cashman's the greatest GM in the history of the sport. He's the Tom Brady of GMs. And he's not the only one that said that to me. So that's a big difference in perception. And when I started telling Yankee fans that Billy Beane said that, jaws were dropping. It's like, the guy that we want fired? So that was a big gap in two different perceptions. And there's the way that a Derek Jeter or a Joe Torre were perceived in the organization were different and more complex than how I think a lot of fans perceived it. I'm not saying the fans are wrong. Those two brought them a lot of winning, but that's a difference in perception internally and externally to some degree. And then just like the unsung heroes that made the Yankees. There's a name, Bill Livesey, that I talk a lot about in the book. People who really set that. We hear about G. Michael, but we don't really hear about your Bill Liveseys and a few others who really set the Yankee philosophies that they still go by. So those are some of the things that were interesting and surprising.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it kind of harkens back to another book that is pretty popular in the baseball world, and that's Evan Drellich's "Winning Fixes Everything," right? And you kind of think about what if you kind of flip the ring situation for someone like Aaron Judge and Derek Jeter. What are their perceptions? How are they viewed? How are their legacies written? And obviously, you can't just take away winning or whatever it may be, but it is definitely an interesting conversation to have. And kind of drawing some parallels here between kind of the captain of today, Aaron Judge, and the captain of old, Derek Jeter. You delved into kind of the tumultuous relationship Jeter and Cashman had during their negotiations. What were some parallels and differences between the negotiations that Jeter and Cashman had, or I guess Jeter's representative and Cashman, and then the negotiations with Judge's camp and Cashman?
Yeah, there were parallels in that in both cases, the player and the agent believed that the Yankees were being more public than they should be. So there was conflict there. But beyond that, it was two very different scenarios. With Jeter and Cashman, you had two guys that were really two different pillars of the Yankees in different ways, right? The guy that constructed the roster and the guy that was the icon of that era. And they'd had years of Cashman thinking Jeter should move positions as his range declined. Cashman thinking that Jeter should be more inclusive of a leader and help A-Rod more than he did and support A-Rod with fans and internally in the clubhouse. So there was more built up resentment there between those two than there was with Cashman and Judge. And when Jeter and his agent got upset with the Yankees and Cashman for like leaking negotiation details, Cashman still in 2024 is adamant that he did not do that. He doesn't know where that's coming from. And that's still a point of contention between those sides that they'll never agree on. With Judge, it was, if you remember, when talks broke down over an extension on opening day, which ultimately became year that he hit the 62 home runs, the Yankees announced their offer, which Judge had rejected, and Judge felt that the Yankees were trying to make him look bad with the fans. And those sides still disagree over whether or not Cashman and his people insist that they said to Judge very clearly, we're going to share this. And Judge and his agent don't necessarily remember it that way. But Judge and Cashman are in good standing now. Judge is an important leader in that organization. And so I would say that relationship is less dramatic than Cashman's was with Jeter.
Yeah, and I think you recently mentioned that Judge is the best leader that Brian Cashman has had. I guess maybe from a player standpoint. Can you talk about what makes Aaron Judge such a great captain, such a great leader, from some of the reporting you've done?
Sure. There are plenty of folks who love Derek Jeter and swear by him and say this guy's the best leader ever been around and all that. So that's important to say as well. But I would say after around 2004. I was told in this reporting there developed what was called referred to as a caste system in the clubhouse. If you won, you're on one side of it, and if you are newer and you haven't won, you're on another side of it. Biggest example of that being A-Rod, obviously, and that divide. And there are people that think that Jeter wasn't inclusive enough, and with everybody. There are players that came up and down real quick and didn't necessarily get quality time with the captain or what have you. A-Rod, actually, for all his flaws, was pretty good with that with the younger players when he became a veteran. Judge is, I would say, universally beloved among his teammates because the question isn't whose clubhouse is this. Like with Jeter and A-Rod, whose team is it? All that exhausting drama for them. With Judge, it's his team, but that's because he doesn't demand it in that he's not territorial. It's like, I talked to him about his style of leadership. He's like, some days it's Garrett Cole's team. You go get him, big boy. Some days it's G's team, which he calls Stanton. When I talked to him about this, Donaldson was on the team even. He's like, Josh Donaldson, former MVP. You're a stud. So we're following you today. Which helps a guy who's in decline like Donaldson was probably feel a little better about himself. So he is really somebody who is valued by like everybody in the room. Whereas Jeter was valued by a lot of people, but I wouldn't say that every account that I've had is that he was like inclusive of everybody necessarily.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned like A-Rod's relationship with like younger players because I think Melky Cabrera recently did an interview where he talked about like A-Rod was kind of like a dad to him, almost like a father figure, where like their relationship was very good and that whenever he needed something, A-Rod was there for him. And team culture is something you highlight a lot in the book. You talk about like when the Yankees added CC Sabathia, kind of the change in dynamics there and adding somebody to kind of rejuvenate that clubhouse. Do you see those kind of similarities with somebody like Juan Soto? Obviously, it's a different clubhouse. You kind of talk about the differences between Judge's and Jeter's locker rooms or clubhouse environments. But Juan Soto obviously is a great player on the field. We know the effect he's had in the lineup. On the field, actually, you talked about some of the work he did in the offseason. But from a clubhouse standpoint, like what does he bring to this team?
Soto, I'd say first and foremost, it's the approach at the plate because we talk about the Yankee Way. A big part of that, going back to Gene Michael's days in the 80s, is working the count and the on-base percentage to the point before, like more than 2 decades before Moneyball came out. Stick Michael was valuing Willie Randolph for being a high on-base second baseman. So Soto is like if you designed an on-base percentage guy in a lab. I mean, it might be Jason Giambi, it might be Juan Soto, just every single pitch, having the eye that's like so precise, being right more often than the umpires are right sometimes. So that's the biggest thing he's brought. Culture-wise, I mean, he's a hard worker. He smiles. He's into the game. He's a positive. But I would say the game-changing aspect to Soto is really like his style of play and his style of at-bats, which is just so perfect for the Yankees. And the team has had a more patient approach this year. Whether that's a literal trickle-down effect or not, it's sort of hard to prove, but it sure seems like he's had an impact on that lineup up and down.
Yeah, absolutely. A metric that a good friend of mine, Robert Orr, came out with, Seager, which is, it's based on Corey Seager because he has some incredible plate discipline in terms of making swing decisions in zone. The Yankees have jumped up a lot in that metric. So, and I think just like visually, I don't even think you need the numbers to look at just kind of like the quality of at bats and kind of. I know Brian Wu kind of went against this grain yesterday. He did a lot of. He was very efficient against the Yankee lineup, but they've been able to run up pitch counts. And kind of looking at pitching here, the Yankees have actually been a really good pitching team, and I think that's come at a surprise because they don't don't have Garrett Cole. He is still yet to throw a pitch in a major league game this season. And I think the biggest thing you could point at is obviously the turnaround for various guys on the roster, but you also kind of look at the big picture here with guys like Matt Blake and Sam Breen. You actually detailed a little bit about that hiring process for those important figures. Can you speak on some of the biggest changes that they've had, obviously on the pitching side of things and then behind the scenes?
Yeah, they have a really strong pitching program, and now we're obviously really seeing the results of that. You could see it a couple years ago when they turned Clay Holmes into a star, and there's some other examples. But yeah, I mean, Larry Rothschild, the previous pitching coach, was highly respected. Did a good job. The pitchers liked him, but there did come a point where the front office and Cashman felt like we want to really, really modernize this operation. So yeah, Matt Blake on the major league side, and then on the player development side now, as you mentioned, it's very consistent. Where they're just on the cutting edge of pitch usage and pitch shapes and all these high-tech things, and they have a really good major league staff of players who buy in a way that buy into that. Garrett Cole can talk about this stuff in a way that makes my head spin. I mean, you don't even understand when he gets so technical. Stroman's like that. Clark Schmidt's like that. So they have a cohesive culture there, and Matt Blake himself, Cole said in the book, when he got here, he was like a 34-year-old, Blake was, no experience in major league pitching coach. So there's just a learning curve in terms of being a big leaguer. And Cole says he just gets better every year in terms of his mound visits, his, the human stuff. Blake's a very relatable guy. He's one of those guys that's fluent in analytics, that knows how to actually speak about it in lay terms. And that's always been a benefit, but he's just gotten more and more strong with that as the years have gone by, and that's one of the reasons. So you've got a pro scouting staff that collaborates with the analytical side to identify acquisitions that they think they can improve, and then when they get here, you have Blake, and if they're minor leaguers, you have the player development side, and all these things working, all these departments working in concert to create these good pitchers. And it's funny because last year, all that narrative about the Yankees are too analytical. Well, if you like the pitching staff now, you're probably not complaining about the use of analytics, because that's been a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think overall, analytics is just kind of like this buzz term that people throw around without really knowing what it means. It's always like, it's analytics this, analytics that. It's like, analytics are why this player's bad. It's like, I don't think analytics want sub 300 OBPs and guys, striking out 85% of the time or whatever it may be. But, another guy that kind of represents that pillar of, as you mentioned, not just, being able to understand analytics, but also convey them, is a guy like James Rousing. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what that hire has done and some of the differences between him and some previous hitting coaches?
Well, yeah, he's somebody who, like Blake, is a really good communicator, but also understands the metrics. Just a good blend. He's an example, and Pat Rossler too is just a real good dyed-in-the-wool hitting guy. So they have a good mix of people now who maybe this wasn't the case in the past, where they feel like these guys have a good hold on the numbers, but understand the blend, which is what the Yankees are going for. And Aaron Judge has been really influential in the organization in his conversations with Cashman and Hal Steinbrenner, and making sure that the front office understands that they need a little bit more of that blend. And the front office responded by hiring those kinds of coaches, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of shifting gears towards some more recent stuff and this year and some potential either future or current moves. The rotation's a big question mark, not in a bad way, and actually a pretty good way, because when or if Garrett Cole comes back, obviously, cross your fingers, rehab goes well, all that stuff. There is a rotation question. Who do you think, if you were to predict now, kind of based on where trends are going, who do you think gets pulled or gets the hook?
I don't know, and I think they have the right to. Well, first of all, these conversations, unfortunately, are almost always resolved by injury, so we should probably, as you know, we should remind people of that. Usually the choice is made by that factor. But if that doesn't happen to anyone, this is a tough one. There's nobody that deserves to be taken out of that rotation, so at that point you probably have to look at whose stuff plays best out of the bullpen. I mean, you could say, I'm not so sure that Nestor Cortez is the guy who would be defined that way. He's a better mid-rotation starter than he would be a leverage reliever. I mean, it's pretty clear that Heal's stuff or Schmidt's stuff would play in the bullpen incredibly. It's got to be. I mean, to take Heel out of the rotation would be really tough, but also imagine him in a late inning swingman role in the playoffs paired with Holmes. So I'm sure those are the kinds of things the Yankees are going to be weighing, but I don't think they've decided yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's tough because, I mean, as you alluded to, number one, injury, especially with pitchers, right? Like, you're always one pitch away from something unfortunate. And then just kind of looking at, like, a guy like Nestor, like, everybody's kind of, like, pounding the table, like, he's got to be in the bullpen, but he's the guy who leads the team in innings pitched. He's averaging over 6 innings a start. That's valuable, especially in the regular season when you're trying not to kill your bullpen. But, the bullpen is something that they could address in the deadline and kind of moving towards this here. Trade talks are always going to surround this team, it feels like, because they're always good. Like, in my lifetime, I think they've missed the playoffs 5 times. That's a very low number.
So they're usually buyers.
Yeah, usually. But even last year, they went out and got a reliever in Keenan Middleton. So, what are some positions you could see them looking to upgrade? And are there any players that they've shown interest in the past who could be available at the deadline, or that you think they could show interest in coming up?
I know specific players, it's too early to say, but I know that they have the bullpen results have by and large been very good, but I think there's a little less strikeout and velocity and power and that stuff that plays really well in the bullpen. So as good as the results have been, this might be weird to say, but I feel like they're an arm or two short in the bullpen. And if you want to win the World Series, which they obviously do, that's an area probably to address. Be interesting to see how things shake out at second base. They've obviously had interest in Gleyber Torres before from other teams. Now the value wouldn't be great if you're talking about half a season of Gleyber Torres. Plus, if he starts performing consistently, then the Yankees would want him. So if he gains value, you probably want to keep him. So that's a tricky one. But second base is really one of the only areas that you could look at where you could say very clearly, like, that could be upgraded. You could say that they have depth at third. But if you could come up with an everyday third baseman, that might be intriguing too. We'll see what LeMahieu can offer them at this point. How sustainable. Birdie and Cabrera are probably clearly better suited to the bench. Not to the bench, but to like a versatile role. I think you could look at relievers and possibly those two infield positions to really shore up what is really a pretty complete roster.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump the gun here, but it does feel like the most complete roster they've had in a very long time. Even comparing to 2022, it didn't really feel like obviously a guy like Town was performing well, but you didn't feel like he had the overpowering stuff to start him in the playoffs. Although in his one start, he did perform pretty well against a pretty good Houston Astros lineup. And then just kind of look at the lineup, it was very much the Aaron Judge show after probably around May. So, this team does feel a lot more complete, and one of the biggest reasons, obviously, is Juan Soto. Where do you think he ends up this offseason, if you had to predict, and how much do you think he'll sign for?
I think that if this keeps feeling as right as it does with between him and the Yankees, that the Yankees can't possibly let him sign anywhere else. You just can't do it. They've got to keep him. You're the New York Yankees, and I understand Steve Cohen's going to want him. I understand that there may be some other teams. I mean, not a lot of people, because we're talking. I mean, Ohtani got like a fake $700 million, where he's getting it all like decades from now deferred. I wouldn't be surprised if Boris and Soto are pushing toward a number like that in real present day dollars. That's just, I'm not reporting that that's the price or anything, but why wouldn't they? He's clearly a superstar at that level, and I know that the Mets can outbid the Yankees, but this is a case where the Yankees just can't let it happen. You can't let him go to your crosstown, the other team. I'm not going to call the Mets their rival, but you can't let him go across town. You can't let him go anywhere else if it continues to feel the way that it feels for them in Soto right now.
Yeah, especially seeing that he's 25 years old, left-handed outfielder, right? Like it's a marriage made in heaven.
Perfect.
It is. In a sense, yeah, he is the exact kind of player I think every Yankee fan has begged for the team to have for a decade plus. And this is no shot at Aaron Judge, but obviously fans are going to be a little more biased towards the left-handed contact hitting hitter that has power over a right-handed power hitter. And that's whether that's fair or not. It's just how the fan base is. Ultimately it'll be a very interesting free agent saga, and yeah, I think it'll be a sum of money I don't think I'll ever see in my lifetime. So
me either. Even if you were to combine what we're gonna make in our lifetimes, Ryan, we probably don't hit Soto's number.
Hey man, I won't sell a short. I won't sell a short on that front. But hey, I'm still 19. Maybe I can get the arm going, get a little velo.
That's true. That's true.
Hey,
you never know.
Always that tie. I did play a little bit. It wasn't very good, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But yeah, no, thank you, Andy. This was awesome. This is a ton of fun. Obviously, there is a lot, whether it's the book, whether it's your reporting, there's a lot of value in just following your work. Can you tell us where we can find you and tell us, more? Yeah.
SNY, where I work, Baseball Night, New York, weeknights at 6. Read my columns and articles on their website. And buy my book. That's the most important thing today to say. And thank you, Ryan, for having me on to plug it.
Yeah, absolutely. Links will be in description to purchase the book and obviously to all your work with SNY. Andy, thank you so much for coming on. You guys can check us out at Fireside Yankees on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course this YouTube page. And you can follow me at Ryan Garcia ESM. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, everybody.